It's time again for another installment of the basics, and like last week where I did rookie mistakes for deck building in the X-Files CCG, today's show is rookie mistakes that you can make building decks in the Star Trek CCG, and there are a lot of them. So let's get started, and I'm going to show you what to avoid. As I've mentioned on previous episodes of this show, it's already hard enough building a deck for the Star Trek CCG. If you're a brand new player or have never played it before, it's even more difficult. So here's some of the top mistakes you need to avoid when building a deck. The first being missions. A lot of players go for the multi-affiliation missions because they're easy to pass once the dilemmas are done and the payouts for points are pretty good. But this causes problems. If you have missions that almost any affiliation can attempt, that are listed here, your opponent's going to make a play for them as well. That could lead you into early combat that you're not ready for. It could be a disaster. And who knows, he might be able to complete it quicker than you. Your best bet is to go for 3 or 4 single affiliation missions that only help you, or, and you're going to forgive me for mentioning this, but these missions that any crew can attempt. Now you're going to probably ask me why I've selected these. For one reason. They are much harder to complete, but if your deck is set up properly, you can score the points, get past everything, and your opponent might end up being stuck. They're perfect to have in a deck. Not too many, I would say 2 or 3 at the most, spread out on the space line, but they do work. The next mistake that I used to see a lot of when I played more regularly is event cards being used improperly, and that would be raise the stakes. If you're a brand new player, you have no reason to include this in a deck. You're probably going to end up losing more often than not the first bunch of times you play. You don't want to lose any of your cards to your opponent that quickly. Leave this out of your deck until you become more established. Espionage cards. I used to see so many people load their decks with so many espionage cards, whether or not they were using a dual affiliation deck or just trying to shake things up. You don't need to have these in your deck if they're completely unnecessary to your cause or the way your deck is set up. Try to stay away from these until you become more of an established player. The Traveler. Now, some people are going to yell at me because it is a good card, but placed beside any player's draw deck, that player must draw 1 extra card at the end of each turn. Also, while in play, nullifies static warp bubble. So yes, you can nullify the static warp bubble, it's good for that. But your opponent drawing an extra card at the end of each turn might not be a bad thing. Now I've seen this go down where someone did that to me, and thanks to that, I either was able to draw an extra red alert, or a personnel I needed, or another event or artifact card that ended up helping me win the game. You have to be careful with this card. Very careful. The Bajoran problem. Now, I've mentioned before on this show that the Bajorans make a weak deck. Not so much because of their personnel, but because of their ships and the fact that the missions are a little screwed up. And there are a lot of Bajoran personnel like these that have great attributes, but people that make Bajoran decks have a tendency of shoving all their best people on 1 or 2 of those puny ships. And yeah, you all know what's going to happen there. With ships that are weak as shit, and that many people loaded on, you're just asking for your opponent to wipe you out and end the game quickly. If you are going to build a Bajoran deck, try not to put all your best people on one ship. Use your lower attributed people on those ships to get them moving and add as necessary and spread them out. Don't put them all in one place. And finally, this is a huge mistake that a lot of new players make, and I actually did this at the very beginning myself. I put way too many equipment cards in my deck. And we're talking at the very beginning when I played in 1994 and 1995, I would have 3, 4 copies of tricorder, engineering kit, things like that, or pad, not to mention tons of Type 2 and Type 1 phasers for combat situations that I ended up not getting into. When you're building a deck for this game, depending on your personnel, the last thing you want to do is weight it down with equipment, because if you're drawing cards from your deck into your hand every turn and all they are is equipment instead of the personnel or events that you need, you are screwed. Now those are the main mistakes that I've listed. There are smaller ones that can be made with deck building, and one of the ones I haven't talked about is the original wormhole card interrupt from the Premier set. I've seen a lot of players put 3 pairs of wormholes in their decks. Why? 1 is enough. It's not going to help you that much. So you really have to be aware of what you're doing when you're building a deck, and I can't stress that enough, and I know I've said that before on other shows, but it's true. These are mistakes that might not seem all that bad to you, but they could cost you huge in the gameplay, and rather quickly too. So be aware of that. That's all for today. Have a great day, everybody.